If you close your eyes and picture the Caribbean, perhaps what comes to mind are stretches of white sand beaches, turquoise waters shimmering in the sunlight, and coconut palms swaying gently in the sea breeze. But beyond its famed natural beauty, the Caribbean is also a land of remarkable diversity, a crossroads where cultures, languages, and traditions converge to create a truly unique symphony. From English, Spanish, and French to Creole and the few surviving indigenous dialects, each island here carries its own story, contributing to a cultural richness that is rivaled by few places in the world. Yet, behind this beauty lies a long history, sometimes harsh and filled with hardship. Before the arrival of European powers, the Caribbean was not an empty land, but instead the final frontier for waves of migrants and extraordinary survival communities. Thousands of years ago, this region posed a formidable challenge for anyone daring to cross its waters by dugout canoe or simple bamboo raft. They had to contend with strong winds, powerful currents, and sudden storms that swept in from the Atlantic Ocean. And yet, people still found a way to overcome these obstacles and set foot on the countless islands large and small that dot these seas, from Cuba to Puerto Rico and the hundreds of other islands scattered across the region. As early as the 16th century, the first European explorers were astonished to find ancient indigenous cultures thriving here. Archaeological sites, ancient pottery, and everyday artifacts scattered across the islands hinted at communities that had once flourished, only to later disappear without a trace. Even so, for centuries, scientists have struggled with the same fundamental questions. Who were the first people to cross the sea and settle the Caribbean? Which ancient civilizations were they descended from? And after centuries of migration, the slave trade, and colonial conflict, do any connections still remain between these ancient settlers and the indigenous communities that live here today? For a long time, these questions had no clear answers. Earlier theories were based on comparing pottery styles or languages, but these were always controversial. Some scholars argued that the first people to reach the Caribbean came from South America, traveling down the Orinoco River and then crossing the sea through the chain of Antilles Islands. Others suggested that migration waves might have originated in Central America, or even from the coastlines of North America, helped along by favorable ocean currents such as the Gulf Stream. Only in recent years, with the remarkable advances in ancient DNA science, has a truly new door opened. For the first time, researchers can directly analyze the genes of ancient human skeletons, uncovering the exact lineages, genetic connections, and even the migration journeys of the Caribbean's earliest inhabitants. To truly understand the origins of the people in the Caribbean, we have to go back thousands of years before Europeans ever set foot here. According to archaeological evidence, the very first groups arrived on the major Caribbean islands, places like Cuba, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, somewhere between 8,000 and 5,000 years ago. This was such an ancient era that the coastal regions of North America were still inhabited by primitive nomadic tribes, and the earliest civilizations of South America were only just beginning to take shape. These pioneers were not farmers, at least not in the way we usually imagine later communities. Instead, they were hunter-gatherers, living off their deep understanding of the sea and the natural world around them. They were skilled sailors. Despite their simple technology, they managed to brave the turbulent waves of the Caribbean Sea in dugout canoes. They survived by fishing, gathering shellfish, and foraging for wild plants. What set them apart was their remarkable ability to adapt to their environment. While the mainland often provided more reliable sources of food, these isolated islands posed their own harsh challenges: unpredictable rainy seasons, long periods of drought, and a constant scarcity of fresh water. To survive, the archaic peoples didn't rely on just a single food source, but combined many types. They also knew how to store food, and made use of shells not only as tools, but also as ornaments and decorative objects. Archaeologists have uncovered their traces through the presence of vast shell heaps, known as shell middens, scattered across many large and small islands. These were places where ancient people gathered to eat, cook, and left behind millions of shells, along with tools made from bone or coral. Some of the shell middens in Cuba and Hispaniola are so large that they look like white sandhills, sometimes rising several meters high, reflecting communities that lived in the same place for centuries. In addition, ancient burial sites reveal their funeral customs and early spiritual beliefs. Some skeletons were buried with small objects, beads made from shells, or unusual stones, suggesting that even at this early stage, people respected their ancestors and believed in a world beyond. The archaic peoples did not stay rooted in one place for too long. They often moved with the seasons, seeking out coastal waters rich in fish or relocating to another island when local resources became scarce. This pattern of migration and wandering is evident in the scattered distribution of archaeological sites and the diversity of artifacts from one island to the next. Interestingly, even though they lived isolated in the middle of the sea, the archaic Caribbean people maintained certain links with far-off lands. Many pieces of flint or shell jewelry found in Cuba and Puerto Rico have origins in mainland Central America or the southern Bahamas. This points to the existence of material exchange networks, whether through direct trade or via a series of intermediaries between ancient islanders and their counterparts on the continents. After millennia of the Archaic Age, a time when people survived through hunting, gathering, and fishing, the Caribbean began to witness a significant transformation. Around 2,800 years ago, the islands, both large and small, received an entirely new wave of migrants, ushering in the next chapter in the region's history. This was the Ceramic Age. The most striking difference with these later arrivals was that they brought with them entirely new skills and customs. They were no longer nomads wandering from place to place. Instead, these were agricultural communities who knew how to cultivate crops. These people built permanent villages, established long-term communal lives, and developed the craft of pottery, something that previous generations had never possessed. Their pottery was not only used for cooking, storing water, or preserving food, but it also reflected the unique features of each culture. Through archaeological excavations, scientists have discovered an astonishing diversity of shapes, patterns, and colors in the ancient ceramic vessels found across the major islands. Recent research shows that most of the people who brought this Ceramic Age culture originated from the Orinoco River Basin in what is now Venezuela, northern South America. They crossed over small island chains known as the Lesser Antilles in a stepping stone fashion, then gradually spread northward to Puerto Rico and Cuba. Their movement was not random, but organized along favorable ocean currents, making use of large canoes hollowed from tree trunks and skilled seafaring techniques. These migrations carried not only people, but also seeds, livestock, and language. The arrival of the Ceramic Age people marked a major cultural turning point across the Caribbean. Living spaces shifted from caves and coastal sites to permanent villages, located further inland or along small rivers. Intercropped fields, food storage facilities, and systems of trade between islands began to appear, proving the existence of wide-ranging connections and a much higher level of social organization than before. Socially, the people of the Ceramic Age had a more defined community structure. They had chiefs, shamans, potters, artisans, and complex religious rituals such as burials accompanied by grave goods or ceremonies related to the moon, sun, and sea. Archaeological sites on the large islands still preserve the remains of oval-shaped houses, small figurines made of clay or stone, and countless artifacts that testify to their rich spiritual and social lives. Moreover, the Ceramic Age groups were highly innovative in both technique and art. They crafted finely polished stone tools, created axes, and made jewelry from shells. These items were not just for daily use, but were also exchanged between island and mainland communities. What is remarkable is that this transformation did not happen on just one island, but spread throughout the entire Caribbean, changing the economic landscape of the whole region. From the perspective of modern scholars, the Ceramic Age laid the foundation for the great indigenous civilizations that followed, most notably the Taíno of Cuba, the Kalinago of the Lesser Antilles, and many other groups. Tracing the genetic footprints of ancient peoples in the Caribbean is no simple task. Unlike the frigid lands where bones and DNA can survive for tens of thousands of years beneath layers of permafrost, the Caribbean's climate presents scientists with an almost insurmountable challenge. High humidity, year-round heat, and frequent heavy rains accelerate the process of decomposition. Not only do bones decay rapidly, but the fragile DNA molecules themselves are also broken down into tiny fragments, sometimes leaving behind almost nothing for analysis. Faced with these obstacles, generations of archaeologists and geneticists have had to accept major limitations when it comes to ancient genetic data from the Caribbean. In the past, they had to rely on indirect methods, such as comparing pottery styles, to speculate about the origins and connections between ancient groups. However, these methods were imprecise and often led to controversy. Yet, over the past decade, a breakthrough has emerged thanks to advances in ancient DNA sequencing technology. In particular, a technique known as hybridization capture has opened a new chapter in genetic research within such harsh environments. This method uses custom-designed molecular probes, ultra-fine hooks engineered to seek out and fish for the remaining DNA fragments in bone samples. Simply put, it's like using millions of microscopic fishing hooks to trawl through a sea of chaotic data, pulling up only the special gene fragments that researchers need. At the forefront of this project was a collaboration between Germany's renowned Max Planck Institute, already a pioneer in ancient genetic studies around the globe, and the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, which is well known for its biotechnology research. This international team surveyed, selected, and sampled remains from 16 major archaeological sites across the Caribbean. Each site presented its own unique geological and historical characteristics, together creating an exceptionally diverse dataset. The results far exceeded expectations. The research team was able to obtain DNA data from 93 ancient individuals, with ages ranging from 3,200 to 400 years ago. This achievement was unprecedented for the Caribbean, a region where, until recently, successful DNA decoding was considered nearly impossible. Thanks to this dataset, scientists could not only identify the origins of each ancient group, but also trace migration routes, track genetic changes over time, and even measure the level of interaction between different communities. When scientists began decoding ancient DNA samples collected from major archaeological sites in Cuba, they quickly realized that this data was revealing an entirely new story about the formation of the earliest archaic communities in the Caribbean. Of the 93 ancient individuals sampled from across the region, as many as 52 belong to the Archaic Age, found at 7 different locations across Cuba, with ages ranging from 3,200 years ago all the way to the near-modern era. Each genome is like a tiny piece in the vast puzzle of human migration history. Most notably, a stunning discovery emerged from a human bone sample found at the Cueva del Perico cave in western Cuba, labeled CI 000009. When geneticists compared this individual's DNA sequence, they were surprised to find a clear similarity between the ancient Cubans' DNA and that of the indigenous peoples who once lived on the Channel Islands off the coast of California more than 5,000 years ago. This was a genetic connection no one had ever considered before, given the immense distance between Cuba and the California coastline, thousands of kilometers across vast, treacherous seas. This discovery opened up a bold new hypothesis that some of the first groups to reach the Caribbean may not have come solely from South America, as many scholars previously believed, but also had origins in North America. These may have been ancient explorers, daring enough to cross the ocean in small boats, or perhaps taking advantage of the Gulf Stream, a powerful, natural highway running from the east coast of North America toward the northern Caribbean islands. If this theory is correct, then the seafaring skills and bravery of these archaic peoples were truly extraordinary, on par with the legendary Polynesian or Viking explorers in world history. To further investigate this genetic connection, scientists employed several advanced genetic analysis methods. First, they used principal components analysis, PCA, a tool that allows researchers to map out the genetic positions of ancient individuals and compare them with both modern and ancient groups across the Americas. The results showed that the archaic individuals in Cuba were completely distinct from modern indigenous populations of North, Central, and South America. This separation indicates that they belong to an older migration branch, one that split off early from the main ancestral migration route into the Americas, then developed independently in the Caribbean. But the analysis didn't stop there. Scientists also used F4 statistics, a technique that examines the amount of shared DNA between different groups, to delve deeper into the comparison between ancient Cubans and other ancient populations in the region. Once again, the results reinforce the connection between archaic Cubans and ancient communities in North America, especially in California, while also highlighting clear differences between them and later arriving migrant groups in the Caribbean. This means that the early settlement history of the Caribbean was not just a story of people crossing the sea from South America to the north, but a complex convergence of multiple migration streams, including ancient groups from far to the north, who went on to develop into their own distinct island communities. After genetic analyses from the Archaic Age had already changed our perspective on the first people to set foot on the Caribbean islands, scientists turned their attention to the later generations, the communities of the Ceramic Age. From more than 16 archaeological sites scattered across the major islands, researchers successfully collected and analyzed the DNA of 41 ancient individuals, dating from approximately 1,500 to 400 years ago. Notably, these individuals represent a spectrum of populations who lived across nearly a millennium, from the early stages of the Ceramic Age right up to the final years before Europeans arrived in the Caribbean. As geneticists decoded and compared the genomes of these Ceramic Age individuals to modern populations across the Americas, they discovered a picture of origins completely different from that of the Archaic group. The results showed that the DNA of Ceramic Age inhabitants in the Caribbean is strongly aligned with present-day indigenous groups in South America. particularly those who speak Arawakan languages, a major language family that once spread from the Amazon basin to the northern coastal plains of South America. Among these, the Piapoco people of Colombia and Venezuela stand out as the closest genetic relatives of the ancient Caribbean Ceramic Age population. This connection is not only evident in the genetic markers, but it also precisely matches long-standing archaeological theories about a northward migration wave originating in the Orinoco River Basin, crossing through the chain of small eastern Caribbean islands and gradually spreading to larger islands like Puerto Rico. Scientists used a powerful tool called QPAD-M, a mathematical model that reconstructs migration history by analyzing genetic admixture among ancient and modern groups. Thanks to this method, they were able to identify a stepping stone migration pattern, in which each new group would temporarily settle on a small island before continuing their journey north, much like stepping stones crossing a wide stream. The analyses revealed that this process did not happen overnight, but was instead a long chain of migrations lasting centuries or even 1,000 years. On each island, the Ceramic Age communities developed their own distinct cultural traits, from pottery styles and agricultural techniques to languages and social customs. However, the genetic unity among populations on so many islands, both large and small, shows that they maintained a remarkably flexible network of exchange and migration up and down the Caribbean. When the Ceramic Age people with their agricultural skills, pottery techniques, and advanced social organization arrived in the Caribbean islands, many scientists once assumed that interaction with the earlier archaic hunter-gatherer communities would naturally occur. In theory, when ancient groups met, they often produced mixed generations, where gene pools merged and created a diverse genetic landscape, much as history has shown in many other parts of the world. However, what researchers actually discovered was quite the opposite, leading to considerable surprise. When scientists performed in-depth DNA analyses of both groups, the archaic settlers from thousands of years earlier and the later arriving Ceramic Age people, they were astonished to find that genetic admixture between these communities was almost non-existent. Aside from a single individual in Puerto Rico, labeled PDI 00009, who carried about 13% archaic ancestry, nearly all other Ceramic Age individuals showed no trace of genetic heritage from the earlier settlers. This is a rare and remarkable finding in the history of ancient genetics, because in most regions around the world, new migration waves tend to mix at least to some degree with the local populations over generations. The absence of admixture in the Caribbean has prompted scientists to raise new questions about the reasons and historical circumstances behind this phenomenon. There are several prominent hypotheses that might explain this situation. First, geography played a major role. The Caribbean is an expansive archipelago, with many small islands isolated by sea or rugged terrain. This allowed communities to remain spatially separate for long periods, with little need for direct contact or competition for resources. Second, differences in language, culture, and religious beliefs between the two groups may have created significant barriers to integration. The Ceramic Age arrivals brought complex social structures, focused on agriculture and settled village life, while the archaic peoples continued to rely on hunting, gathering, and marine resources. In fact, recent archaeological studies have shown that traces of these two groups are often found in entirely different areas on the same island, pointing to a clear division in living space. Another factor not to be overlooked is the presence of invisible cultural or territorial boundaries. In many parts of the ancient world, distinct groups often maintained clear borders or even engaged in minor conflicts to protect their vital resources. This may also have happened in the Caribbean, where archaic and Ceramic Age peoples could coexist on a single island, but rarely interacted or intermarried. Some researchers have also suggested that by the time the Ceramic Age people arrived, the archaic population had already declined significantly due to climate change or resource shortages, resulting in the newcomers replacing the original inhabitants with little genetic mixing. However, this remains only a hypothesis and still requires much more archaeological and genetic evidence to confirm. As geneticists expanded their research from isolated analyses to full genome studies of dozens of ancient individuals, they were confronted with a major question. Was the population history of the Caribbean simply the result of one or two migration waves, or was it a much more complex picture, involving multiple ancestral lineages intertwining and diverging over time? To answer this, the research team employed an advanced statistical tool called QPWave, a modern method capable of determining how many ancestral sources are required to explain the genetic diversity of a group from the past. The results from QPWave prompted the scientific community to reconsider previous theories. Contrary to the popular idea that the archaic inhabitants of the Caribbean originated from a single migration wave, the analysis showed that at least 2 distinct ancestral lineages contributed to this population. This suggests that the first archaic groups to reach the Caribbean were in fact the product of several migration events, possibly originating from different areas of North America or Central America, then converging and developing in isolation on the islands. Some ancient individuals carried strong genetic signatures from North American groups, while others showed a mix with lineages from further south, potentially linked to migration routes along the Central American coast or other maritime pathways. In addition, when the researchers analyzed the ceramic age group, QP wave confirmed a third migration wave, entirely distinct from the 2 previous archaic lineages. As mentioned in earlier sections, this migration originated clearly from South America and brought to the Caribbean both agricultural techniques and Arawakan languages. Interestingly, the migration of ceramic age peoples appears to have followed a stepping stone model, with each small group pausing and temporarily settling on smaller islands before continuing their expansion northward, clearly identifying at least 3 migration waves, and the intermingling of multiple ancestral lineages has completely transformed our understanding of the population history of the Caribbean. What once seemed to be a simple replacement of archaic peoples by ceramic age newcomers now appears, in reality, to be a prolonged process, with the parallel existence of many different communities, some of which vanished among the emerald islands of these seas. From the perspective of modern genetics, the Caribbean is no longer just a land of the forgotten, but a unique crossroads of transcontinental migration, flows a testament to the creativity, adaptability, and unending spirit of exploration of ancient peoples. In reality, the ancient history of the Caribbean is not just a story of migration, it stands as evidence of human diversity, complexity, and adaptability in the face of natural challenges, shifting climates, and cross-sea exchanges. New discoveries in genetics and archaeology not only allow us to understand our ancestral origins more deeply, but also shed light on how ancient peoples preserved and sometimes broke down the boundaries between old and new inhabitants. And as with any journey of human discovery, the story of the origins of the Caribbean's earliest people is certain to remain filled with mysteries waiting for future generations of scientists to unravel. If you are someone who loves history, I invite you to keep following along with me as we continue to explore the great mysteries of the past together.